Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our second CFR training webinar session for the 2022 calendar year consolidated fiscal report. Yesterday's session went well and we went over some good topics, especially in regard to the new CFRS web platform, and we also had a pretty good sized crowd. That session's recording will be posted shortly along with today's session on YouTube. We will send an email out to all providers notifying them of when they are available and where they can be found. Today we will have over 850 attendees again. So hopefully today's session is just as beneficial for you. My name is Alpa Amin. I'm one of the representatives for OPWDD and will be hosting today's webinar. Today's NY State representative will be as follows. Representing OASAS, Paul Green and Paul Sutton. Representing OMH, Richard Brooks, Michelle Zelensky, Sean Griffin. Representing OPWDD, Francis Russello, Kenneth Glenmeyer, myself, and Emily Schwartz. Representing SED, Kate Cochran, Mackenzie Bisler. Representing DOH, Jeffrey Nickerson. Also, we have a survey that will pop up at the end of the event. We would greatly appreciate you taking the time to fill out the survey so that we can continue to make this training better for each time. Session 2 will cover utilities menus, general and agency-specific changes, highlights and supplementals, COVID-19 and COVID-19 as scheduled, claims reporting, DMH2 and DMH3. This slide is important, and hopefully you have had the opportunity to check out previous Q&As that have been posted on the OMS website. We strongly encourage all attendees to ask questions through the Q&A function in the webinar. It is on your right-hand side of your screen, and you might have to click the arrow next to the Q&A to open up the dialog box. If you don't see it, click the 3 dots at the bottom right of the WebEx and then click Q&A. We will not be answering questions today, but plan on answering all the questions and posting answer online, along with the recording of this webinar so that everyone can get the benefit of this webinar and the questions asked. This is good to know when you have a question. This slide shows how to contact each agency. Most of us are still working a hybrid schedule in office and remote, so all the agencies still prefer email contact. Any claim questions can go to the following. As noted on the previous slide, email would be the preferred method. By end of this seminar, we hope to accomplish the following goals. Provide NYS agency contact information for specific questions not covered during this training session. Identify any major changes that have occurred since the release of calendar 2021 CFR manual. Discuss important policies, principles, and rules regarding completion of the CFR via CFR web. Provide guidance regarding the completion of COVID-19 and COVID-19 as information schedules. Help providers become familiar with claiming and supplemental schedule. I will now pass on the presenting to our first panelist for today's session.
Hi, my name is Emily Seward from OPWDD, and I will begin today with the Utilities menu in the CFRS web. The following functions shown here can be found on the Utilities menu. You will notice on this screenshot that the Submit button is grayed out. This function will not be available until the CFR has passed all final validations and a DCN number has been assigned. Also note that this function is only available to CFRS users that have been assigned the submitter role. In the DMH1 to DMH2 transfer, to begin selecting programs, You will first need to select the appropriate state agency from the drop-down up top. Next, select the programs you would like to transfer. Below, either select percentage or units of service for the program allocation. Last, select the county from the drop-down and enter the percentage or units of service and hit the Transfer Programs button. If you need to add a county, click the Add a County yellow button. Next is the Import Data from Text File feature. To begin importing, select the import file type from the drop-down. You will then be able to browse your desktop to select the file. Once the correct file has been selected, you can click the Import button to import. More information on how to format and import data from a text file can be found in the Help feature, which can be accessed at the bottom of the menu. The Export to CSV function will create a spreadsheet from the entered CFR data. Click the Schedule and then the Export button. A file will then show on the bottom of your screen. Open the file to see the newly created Excel report. You can then save the Excel to your own desktop or edit the report. Next is the Change or Delete funding source function. The program codes will already appear here to edit. Click the pencil to edit and the trash can to delete. After the CFR has passed all final validations, a DCN number will be assigned. The DCN stands for Document Control Number and will be associated with all schedules of the CFR, including the certification pages. Uploaded certification pages must have the same DCN number as the submitted CFR. Depending on agency-specific requirements, new certification schedules may need to be submitted on revised CFR submissions. More information on resubmission requirements can be found in Section 2 of the CFR manual. When all required info has been inputted into the CFR and you are ready to submit, you must first go to the Validate Submission / Assign DCN function. Press the Final Validations and Assign DCN button to begin the process. If the CFR does not pass the final validations, it will generate a list of errors that will need to be addressed or corrected in order to assign a DCN number. To view an error, simply click on the listed error and it will bring the user to the error to correct in the corresponding schedule. Once all errors have been fixed, begin the validation process again, selecting Final Validations and Assign DCN. If the errors are not fixed, no DCN number will be assigned, thus you will not be able to submit the CFR. If there are no errors and the CFR passes the final submission stage, the screen here will appear listing the newly assigned DCN number. The user can now submit the CFR. With a validated CFR and DCN, the user can now move to the Submit function in the Utilities menu. Only a file with a DCN number can be submitted. In the Submit Submission function, click on the CFR with a DCN that has not been submitted yet. From there, the user can view submission, edit submission, or submit submission. Again, only a user with a submitter role can submit a submission. If that button is grayed out, the user does not have the ability to submit, and someone that is assigned the submitter role must submit. The ability to submit can also be accessed directly in the Utilities menu under Submit. If your CFR has passed final validations and has been assigned a DCN number, select the correct CFR and click Submit Submission. The user will then have to confirm the submission If so, a confirmation that the CFR has been successfully submitted will show. After a CFR has successfully been submitted, it can now be viewed in the submission dashboard, which is located under the menu under Home. To revise a CFR that has already been submitted, go to the Utilities menu and select Update Submission. From there, the user can check or uncheck the appropriate boxes to add or remove state agencies. Then click the Update Submission section. A warning will then appear to remind the user that adding another state agency will require programs and sites to be added and all other related data. In respect to removing a state agency, that action will result in all programs and sites related to the deleted state agency to be deleted. If you wish to continue, select yes. If you need to continue to edit your state agency selections, then select no. Please note if there is already a work in progress for that reporting period with those state agencies, you will need to delete the duplicate in order to move forward. To view or print any schedules, you can select Print Schedule from the Utilities menu. Before any certification schedules are printed to be signed and uploaded, please make sure that the correct DCN number associated with your CFR submission appears on the certification. If you scroll down from there, there are more print options to use, including expense total by program type, revenue total by program type, and inventory. If you need to view or print data for just one state agency or a few, you can print that information under Advanced Print Options by selecting the appropriate state agency. Please note that all data that is not associated with a specific agency will print when utilizing this print option. You can also filter data and print by selecting a specific county. If you are having trouble printing, you may have pop-ups blocked. When you hit the print button, you will notice on the top right corner of the screen, there is a notice that pop-ups are blocked. It's usually on the address bar. If you click on that, there is a box you can check to allow pop-ups for the CFRS web. And with that, that concludes the utilities section, and I will now be passing it off to the next speaker.
Richard, you are muted.
I apologize for that. Good morning, everyone. I am Richard Brooks, representing OMH. Today, I'm going to review CFR highlights, general changes, OMH supplementals, and OMH, DOH, and OCFS highlights and updates. The transmittal letter will detail changes from the previous CFR manual and can be found along with prior manuals on the SED website by following the link below. It's important to be mindful of the changes listed in the transmittal letter when completing the CFR. Changes in funding source codes or program codes may require immediate corrections when carrying data forward from a prior version of the CFR software to CFRS Web. A KPMG fraud survey found that organizations are reporting more experiences of fraud than in prior years, and that 3 out of 4 organizations have uncovered fraud. The New York State Office of Mental Health's Bureau of Audit has provided the following list of internal controls to assist you in preventing and detecting fraud at your agency. Here are the top 10 internal controls to prevent and detect fraud. These are helpful suggestions and detailed information can be found on the OMH website at the link provided below. Prior recordings of CFR trainings are available on the OPWDD YouTube page. The calendar 2021 training is available at the links provided here. The recording of this presentation will be available at a later date. Questions and answers from prior period presentations are available on the OMH website at the link provided. Written responses to the Q&As from today's presentation will be added to the OMH website at a later date. The next few slides will highlight updates from the prior CFR. The transmittal letter will highlight all the changes, so be sure to review that. Section 2.0 submission requirements has been updated to indicate that all CFR submissions, new or revised, must be prepared using CFRS Web. Signed and dated certification schedules and financials should also be submitted electronically through CFRS Web, along with certification schedules that have electronic signatures. In Section 8.0, the general instructions was updated as follows. The MTA Metropolitan Commuter Mobility Tax was revised to Metropolitan Commuter Transportation Mobility Tax, or MCT-MT, which was also updated on the following schedules: the CFR-1, the CFR-3, the COVID-19 schedules, and in Appendix A. A frequently asked question was added related to non-allowable advertising costs, which are advertising costs related to the general public that seek to increase patient utilization allowed. Per the Provider Reimbursement Manual, costs of advertising to the general public which seeks to increase patient utilization of the provider's facilities are not allowable. In Section 15, the CFR-3 Agency Admin, instructions for line 65 were revised and details will be provided later in the presentation. In Section 16.0, the CFR-4 Personal Services were updated by adding total to the column titles for hours paid and amounts paid. In addition, informational-only columns were added to include overtime, average hourly rate, and annualized salary. In Section 20.0, the DMH-1 instructions for full filers were revised. In Section 23.0, DMH-3 instructions for lines 8 through 18 were revised. In Section 51, Appendix R, the position title code 208 was updated to include OMH. If certifications are e-signed, they must be uploaded through CFRS Web. The checkbox attestation must be selected. The attestation will be provided during the upload stage of the CFR certification pages. Here is the signature attestation for the certification pages. Now we'll take a look at some OMH supplementals, changes, and highlights. Pictured here is the New York State Office of Mental Health, also shared with OPWDD at 44 Holland Ave in Albany, New York. OMH utilizes 4 supplemental schedules: the OMH-1, units of service by program site, the OMH-2, which are Medicaid units of service by program site, OMH-3, client information, and OMH-4, units of service by payer by program site. The OMH-1 schedule provides units of service by program site. Units of service are very important as they are used to determine cost per unit of service for financial planning. The total units of service will be reported on the OMH-1, which will transfer to the CFR-1 line 13 and schedule DMH-1 line 3. The totals must match the aggregate total units of service on the DMH-3 for the same program. Appendix F provides details for the units of service for each OMH program. Here is an example of the OMH-1. The OMH-1 units of service by program is only completed for OMH programs that file a full CFR. Here, you will select a program and site from the drop-down boxes. You will then enter the information on the correct reporting lines. To report information for other programs, you will repeat the steps and select another program and site. CFRS Web will automatically save the data. The OMH-2 schedule is completed for program sites that accrued Medicaid fee-for-service or Medicaid managed care. These are reported separately and will transfer to the CFR-1 line 13A for fee-for-service and 13B for Medicaid managed care. The Medicaid units of service on the OMH should not be more than the Medicaid units of service reported on OMH-1. The following slides show an example of the OMH-2. The OMH-2 Medicaid units of service by program site is only completed for OMH programs that file a full CFR and have program sites that are eligible to bill Medicaid for the services provided. This schedule is set up in a similar way to the OMH-1, except it has been updated to track units of service separately for Medicaid fee-for-service revenues and Medicaid revenues received as part of Medicaid managed care. And each line has an A or B for this purpose. If you need to delete the program from the OMH-2 schedule, click on Delete. Choose OK to delete the program or Cancel to return to the schedule. The OMH-3 schedule provides client information served by the programs. Clients served may differ from number of admissions. Caseloads at the start of the current period should equal the caseload at the end of the prior period for programs with an ongoing caseload. For certain programs, the OMH-3 captures only the number of persons served by the programming site for the year. The beginning and ending numbers on lines 1 and 4 will be 0. In lines 2 and 3, you'll indicate the same number of persons, which were how many people that were seen and how many that were left. The OMH-4, the OMH Clinic Treatment Program 2100, reported on full CFRs, must complete the schedule. Providers must report units of service and revenue by payer. Units of service data is used in the safety net calculation. Total units of service on schedule OMH-4, line 15, should be similar or equal to OMH-1, line 18. Now we'll look at some of the OMH changes. On the CFR-1, lines 13, 13A, and 13B, the line number references for OMH were updated. For the CFR-3, line 65, OMH adjusted subtotals instructions were updated to reflect OMH programs that have been deleted. For section 22.0, the DMH2, line 39, other gap adjustments, Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness was added as a predefined line. For Section 24.0, the OMH1, lines 14 and 15 are now used to report programs 1700 and 1710. Line 16, 17, and 18 are now other, residential, and total units of service. For Section 25, the OMH2 now uses lines 14 through 18 in the same way as the OMH1. In Section 36.0 for Appendix C, the county codes, the descriptions for the county codes were revised for 63, 64, and 80. Appendix F, which lists OMH program types, definitions, and codes, have had many changes. Programs 1700, 1710, 1720, and 8350 were added. Programs 0920, 1910, 2600, 4040, and 6910 have been deleted. And programs 2680, 2730, 4650, 4690, 4710, 4720, and 8810 have been modified. In Appendix N, the following DMH funding source code was added, 046E, which is for the Office of Prevention and Health Initiative Community Support Programs. OMH providers need to continue using MHPD to submit corrections, openings, and closures of programs. The programs and sites reported on your CFR should match our concerts database. Attachment A, generated as part of our desk reviews, should be used as it compares your reported programs on your CFR to our database. Any discrepancies must be resolved. Various legislation has provided additional monies to assist with COVID relief that include the Community Health Services Block Grant and the Federal Medical Assistance Percentage, FMAP, share of funds for Medicaid programs. These supplemental funding opportunities for eligible providers can be used for certain employee-related expenses. This funding requires quarterly reporting to OMH in addition to the CFR. The Supplemental Block Grant and FMAP funding website is a valuable resource linking providers to many additional funding opportunities. Instructions regarding these grants are here at the website. Next, I'll discuss some of the highlights for the Department of Health. DOH providers are required to complete a full CFR submission that includes the schedules listed here. DOH programs listed in Appendix HH must report these services on the CFR. The first 4 digits of your agency code, followed by the first 3 digits of your program code, is your program site identification number. Units of service reporting for each program can be found in Appendix HH. On the CFR, the Integrated Outpatient Services Clinic is reported under Program 2100 for OMH, 3520 for OASAS, and Program Code 1580 for DOH. An allocation between OMH, OASAS, and DOH must be made if the provider operated both OMH and OASAS clinics prior to being designated as an iOS clinic. Programs are required to maintain support demonstrating that they have used a reasonable method of allocating costs. Refer to Section 66, Appendix GG for further instructions. Next, we'll take a look at some OCFS highlights. OCFS providers are required to complete a full CFR submission that includes a schedule listed here. OCFS programs listed in Appendix II must report these services on the CFR. The first 4 digits of your agency code, followed by the first 3 digits of your program code, is your program site identification number. Units of service reporting for each program can be found in Appendix II. This completes this section of the presentation. I will now turn it over to our next presenter.
Thank you, Richard. This is Paul Sutton with the Office of Addiction Services and Supports, and I'll discuss with you the OASAS highlights and changes. This is a picture of our office located at 1450 Western Avenue in Albany. Now, if you don't file your CFR on time, OASAS does have various penalties for the late submission. These may include imposition of fines or withholding of advance payments. Now, ultimately, if you do become compliant and submit everything, then any withheld payments will be returned to you. Here's contact information for the various departments. Depending on what your question is, if you have questions in your budget, you reach out to the budget department. CFR questions, reach out to the CFR unit. Or if you have questions about your state aid, then you reach out to the claiming department. Your CFR submission is not complete without the submission of the required certification schedules and audited or reviewed financial statements. For each DCN number that you submit, a new CFR I, III, and IV must be submitted. And note that subsequent to a CFR II being received, OASAS will accept an attestation reporting minor changes, so you don't have to have your accountant sign off on a new II. We request that all signature pages be submitted electronically to the CFRS web. And additionally, providers must keep your original signatures and attestations corresponding to those for the required retention period and must be able to make these documents available upon request to OASAS and any other controlling party. Even though we request that you upload your signature pages, we will accept emailed copies as well, though we prefer them to be uploaded. If you do email them to us, please use the below naming convention. And be aware that the DCN number on the PDFs emailed must match the DCN number for the latest CFR that you have uploaded. OASAS providers are responsible for uploading and updating their own contact information in the provider directory system. Anytime you have staff changes or names, email addresses, and phone numbers should be updated. This will ensure that providers receive important communications from OASAS, as well as providing current contact names and phone numbers to prospective clients. The place to do this is located at the below web address. Starting in 2021, OASAS received 2 supplemental awards under the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment, or SAPT, block grant through CRF and ARPA collectively, referred to as Fiscal Year 21 SAPT Supplemental Grant Awards. If you receive one of these awards, you're required to report it as follows. On the core schedules, the expenses should be reported on the CFR-1 for direct costs and the CFR-3 for administrative costs. The revenues from this grant would be reported on the CFR-1 line 79 and DMH-1 line 25 federal grants. For your claims schedule, the DMH-2, the expenses are reported in the respective categories, and the revenues on the DMH-2 line 24 as SAPT supplemental. Note that because the contract period for the SAPT grant funds do not coincide with a standard funding period, you will report the expenses and use of the funds on the claiming schedules of the reporting period in which they occur. As a result, you may report expenses and revenues with these grant funds in more than one reporting period. The State Opioid Response, or SOAR, is a federal grant, and we expect it to be reported as such. SOAR is awarded by the Department of Health and Human Services, which is an available line in the detail box under the CFR-1 line 79 federal grants, and is distributed through OASAS Fiscal agent, the Research Foundation for Mental Hygiene. The following programs have been added for OASAS. For Program 4081, Non-Medical Transportation, 4082, Capital Improvements, 4083, Outreach Services, and 4084, Jail-Based Services. You can consult the CFR manual under Appendix E for more detailed descriptions of what's involved with these programs. In order to ensure accuracy, the Fiscal Audit and Review Unit will perform virtual visits, and the CFR Review Unit will perform desk reviews of the CFR submissions. Any areas that need additional explanation or revision will be detailed in a CFR review and emailed to the provider. Failure to respond may lead to withholding of funding or revocation of certificate. Accurate and complete CFR data for OASAS programs is critically important for OASAS fiscal policy development and analysis. Cost report data is also requested and used by other New York State agencies and the federal government for a variety of different purposes. Following are some examples of items covered in our reviews. Are all signature pages, financial statements, and supporting documents completed and submitted? Have you reported all active programs? Is this in the CFR2, does column 1, lines 7, 9, and 10 match the financials? Is the CFR2A completed? Have you completed the CFR3? Are all non-allowable expenses reported in the CFR1, line 40, where CFR3, line 17, adjusted out accordingly? Is the CFR5 completed? Is the 6 completed? Once the core reports are complete, and if any other programs are funded, then from the bottom of the DMH1 screen, select DMH1 to DMH2 transfer in order to begin the creation of the claiming schedules. After transferring the data, you can make manual adjustments to the DMH2 if required. We would not expect adjustments to be made in the reporting for the personal services, fringe benefits, and OTPS expense categories unless there is also a change in the method of accounting. However, adjustments are likely for the remaining categories. Vacation leave accruals. The CFR Web will not transfer vacation leave accruals from the core as it is considered non-reimbursable. Equipment and property. The following adjustments are allowed: the addition of an expensed item in the period it was purchased, and the subtraction of a non-reimbursable expense such as depreciation, interest expense, real estate taxes, and mortgage expenses, which were reported on the CFR1 under various lines. CFRS Web has been updated to include drop-down detail boxes in order to individually list the adjustments from the core. Choose either a predefined line or select Add a Line. For each row of data, select either addition or subtraction to individually list the addition of a fully expensed item or the subtraction of a non-reimbursable expense item. The net amount of these program expenses will transfer to the respective DMH2 line 9 or line 10 for equipment and property expenses. For a full list of non-reimbursable expenses, refer to Section 21.3 of the CFR Manual. OASAS does not allow service providers to budget for or claim depreciation and/or interest expense for state aid reimbursement. OASAS does require a provider to fully expense all equipment and property purchased during the reporting period. CFR Web includes the following predefined entries. Under line 9 for equipment, depreciation for vehicle, equipment, and interest. Any of these expenses, you can just add in the value and it will automatically adjust it out. For property expenses on the DMH2 line 10, we include the following predefined entries: building depreciation, land improvement depreciation, mortgage capital improvement interest, mortgage expenses, real estate taxes, and interest on capital indebtedness. Administrative expenses that are reported on the CFR3 must be prorated to determine the OASAS portion to be adjusted out of the claim on the DMH2 line 12. The prorated share is derived for each program by dividing the program's operating cost from the CFR1 line 64 by the total agency operating expense from the CFR3 line 53. Then you multiply the total of the non-reimbursable costs reported on the CFR3 by the percentage calculated in step 1. You would then report this amount on the DMH2 line 12 for the specific program. The DMH2 line 12 is used to report other than property and equipment non-reimbursable expenses, as well as the prorated percentage of non-reimbursables from the CFR3 agency administration expenses. As I said before, the property and equipment expenses will go on lines 9 and 10. Early retirement incentive payments and severance pay. These expenses should be fully reported in the core reports and the claiming schedules, then adjusted out of the claim on the DMH2 line 12, because these are allowable expenses, however, they're not reimbursable. The expense that is considered not reimbursable for a provider would also be considered non-reimbursable for a related party. Therefore, any depreciation expense or mortgage interest expense noted on the CFR5, may need to be adjusted out as non-reimbursable either fully or partially based on the source of the expense. And this is a screenshot of the CFR5, with the expenses and the adjustments, as for what's allowable as necessary. Now, once we send our reviews out with our findings, a response is required from your agency. If you agree with these findings, the CFR should be revised and validated. Obtain a new DCN number and submit it along with your written response. Once we've confirmed the corrections were made, we'll ask you to upload the CFR and submit certification pages. If you do not agree with the findings, please provide additional explanation along with your supporting documentation, and we'll consider it. Generally, 30 days or less is allowed for your response. If it's a minor question, we might ask you to respond within 2 weeks. More complicated issues, we'll give you a month or so to research it. And this concludes the OASAS highlights and changes. I will now pass this over to our next speaker.
Hello, this is Francis Vasalio with the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. I'm going to cover the highlights and changes for OPWDD. You see that building again that we share with OMH. So the first thing, there are a couple of tricks here that are different when you report on the CFR for a couple of programs than for everything else. For supervised IRAs, you should report your units of service not just for the units that you actually provided, but you're also going to report the therapeutic leave days and also for retainer days that were billed. So that's unique the way that's reported as opposed to our other programs. For respite programs 0311 and 0312, there are times when you're billing on a per diem basis, and each per diem billing should be converted to 96 quarter hours of service when you report on the CFR. We have a number of programs listed there that require you to report on a site-specific basis. All our other programs, everything's reported in one column regardless of how many sites it's offered. For Appendix FF, we'll give you some allocation methodologies for allocating these expenses for these site-based programs. There are times where you may have more than one IRA in the same building and they share some staff and some supplies. And so we've given you some opportunities here. If you can't track the expenses directly to the site, you can use the methodologies here that are recommended for allocating those expenses. Penalties. Unlike some of the other state agencies, the penalties for OPWDD do not get reimbursed when you come into compliance. If you miss the filing deadline, you're going to face at least 1 month worth, 2% of all your Medicaid billings get withheld forever. That means if you're 2 days late, you're still going to be subject to that penalty for the entire month. And then it gets worse. For the calendar CFR, which is due on June 1st, if by August 1st you have it come into compliance, then you're going to be subject to a 50% penalty, which will take effect the following February 1st. Our penalties are tougher because of pressure we receive from the federal Medicaid officials. They don't like how much Medicaid money we spend, and they want to see it accounted for more promptly. This is new. As I said earlier, you have to, for most state agencies, you just have to submit a new CFRI when you revise the CFR. And that's been true for us also. But there's been a change now. And if you want the revised CFR to be used in calculating your reimbursement rates or other funding, we're going to need a double I or a double IA. Now, sometimes you submit a CFR, you're revising it for another state agency, it has no effect on us, or the only effect on us is maybe a change in the administrative allocation. you may decide it's not worth it to give us a new double I for that. We're going to leave that up to you to decide. But again, if you want the new information in the revised CFR to be used for calculating your rates, your transportation reimbursement, et cetera, you're going to have to give us a new CFR double I. We found that not everyone who was using the Residential Reserve for Replacement program was reporting those property expenses separately in the program codes that are available. And this is just a reminder, you need to do that, and failure to do so could put those funds at risk. There are two new FAQs in the manual. One of them has to do with how to report the Workforce Stabilization Initiative. And there's some workarounds here that will allow you to report that funding and give us the information for it and the expenses associated with it in a way that won't affect your DMH reimbursements for those programs where you have DMH schedules. So it's going to be worth your while to pay careful attention to that new FAQ. And likewise, we've developed an FAQ which is very similar that has to do with the healthcare and mental hygiene worker bonus program. So any of you who received any of that funding and passed it along to your staff in increased wages would be well served to look up both of those FAQs and read through them carefully. Line 68 in CFR-1. It now goes up from 68A all the way to 68I. All these lines are information-only lines, and they are for OPWDD only. So the first ones to be concerned with are lines 68A and B. We have a program where we reimburse transportation to and from the residence of your client to the site where the programming is being provided. It's for day treatment, day had, and the pre-growth programs. But in order to get that reimbursement, you have to use program 0670 if you're using your own staff and vehicles to do the transportation, or program 0880 if you're contracting out with a busing company or whatever. The first you allocate, you itemize all your expenses in those program codes, then you allocate the total expense back to your different day have sites, for example. If you do it properly, you'll get that extra funding added into your reimbursement rate for the program. If you don't do it properly, you don't get the funding. So it's important to pay attention to this and report correctly. For those programs like the day have sites, you're going to have to report some number on line 68B. If you didn't have any transportation to report there, to be allocated there, you're going to have to put a 0 in there. This was to keep people from just skipping it inadvertently. Line 68D, some of you may have large programs with separate administrative offices for those programs. For instance, you may have a building where you operate a program, and upstairs in that building is the program administrator's offices. If that's the case, any of the property expenses that you reported on CFR-1, line 63, that are to be allocated to the administrative portion of the property should be reported on line 68, CFR-1, line 68D. Now, this doesn't apply if your program director just has a cubicle on one corner of the room where the program's being conducted. You don't have to try to separate the property costs for a situation like that. Line 60AD. The feds wanted to know, for those of you who operate ICS, how much Medicaid is being billed for the day services provided to those ICF residents. Now, if you're providing those day services yourselves, then it's easy enough to report on line 68E the amount that you billed Medicaid for that. If you're contracting out with another provider agency to come in and provide those services in your ICF, then you're going to have to contact that agency and they're going to have to tell you how much they billed Medicaid, and you're going to have to add that to whatever services you provided yourself, and you're going to have to report all that on line 68E. Line 68F and G. So again, with the Workforce Stabilization Initiative, you're receiving funding that you're passing along in higher wages to your workers. So the wages themselves are reported in CFR-4 along with all the rest of the wages paid to them. But we want to know how much of those wages are from the Workforce Stabilization Initiative. So you'll report that portion again on line 68F. And then you may have, and you will have, additional fringe benefits like FICA and so forth that are associated with those wages. And so you'll report the amount that you reported normally as fringe benefit. You'll also report that portion directly attributable to the Workforce Stabilization Initiative on line 68G. And now we've come up with the Healthcare and Mental Hygiene Worker Bonus Program, and the same thing applies. The extra wages that you're paying, which are included in CFR-4, are also going to be reported on line 68H. And the extra fringe benefits directly tied to those extra wages are going to be reported on line 68I. This started during COVID. Some of you started providing in-home services for your residents of your ICF. If you're using your own staff to provide those services, oftentimes the staff that's normally working in the ICF anyway, you're going to allocate some of those hours that you paid for, or that you your staff was you're paying your staff for, and you're going to report those under this program 0093. And oftentimes that's the only expense you have is your time and the benefits for the staff, your ICF staff who are providing the in-home services that you're billing for. Some of you didn't receive notice that you could do this until early 2022, but that should have all been reported in your 2021 CFR. I know it was missing from some of your CFRs last year. And some of you said your intent was to report it in 2022, even though the services were reported in 2021. They should not be reported on the 2022 CFR. We have 3 supplemental schedules for OPWDD. The first one has to do if you're a provider that does operate ICFs, then you're going to provide some basic information about your ICFs in OPWDD-1. There's one place in the CFR or in OPWDD-1 where you mark if you are providing medical supplies for your clients. That's often the case. If so, Then you get to complete OPWDD 2, which is where you give some detailed information about the medical supplies that are purchased and supplied to your clients at the ICF. OPWDD 5 is a capital schedule. Again, this was inspired by the feds who asked for some more information. Some of you received extra property funding for some of the programs. You see which programs on the screen where this applies to. What you're being asked to give us is information about the extra funding you received and the expenses associated with it. The extra funding that you receive gets posted by DOH at the OPA website where you receive your rates. And as you can see in this screen, whatever you received and the purpose you received it for. See, in this example, the provider was given an extra $20,000 for depreciation on the building and an extra $140,000 for interest, mortgage interest. You would report that in column 1. Now, if you've got one of these programs and program sites and you didn't receive any funding, you have to put a 0 on column 1, line 1, and a 0 on column 2, line 2, because you won't be able to advance and get your DCN if you haven't completed something on the OPWDD 5 schedule. You don't have to put zeros in all the lines, whether you received any funding or not. If you see column 1, you see the $20,000. Column 2 is where you would report the amount of your actual expense that's associated with that extra funding you received. In this case, they're reporting that they actually had over $21,000 worth of depreciation. They were given funding for $20,000. Column 3 just tells you where in the CFR-1 you would find this expense. And keep in mind that not all the dollars reported on that line in CFR-1 would necessarily be associated with this expense, this extra funding you received. Column 4 is calculated by the CFRS web, and it's the difference between column 1 and column 2. And in this case, where the column 5 is where you're going to report the difference or give an explanation. In this case, and whenever the expense is greater than the extra funding you're receiving, one of the predefined explanations is unfunded. There may be times when your actual expense is less than what you're given, and one of the explanations for that that's provided is a timing difference on your depreciation schedule. So column 1's the money you got, column 2 is the expense associated with it, column 5 is the difference and the explanation, which is you hit the orange button to get the drop down for that. For changes for this year, we've changed the definition of program 0257, which is Community Hab Residential Service. We've taken out all the references to group day hab because we changed the nature of that program now. All the ComHab provided in the residence is to be reported in 0257. There are 2 different billing codes for that, 4796, 4797. 4796, I think, used to be reported with program 0237, regular community hab. A lot of you, we've asked you to make a change in the way you reported that now. So keep in mind that 0257 is not just for group community hab any longer. 0065, the START Services program, has been deleted from the CFR, and we've added a new funding source code, 590, which is an OPWDD COLA. . Now I'm going to pass you off to the next presenter and see if I can do this correctly.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Mackenzie Beisler from SED, and I will be going over SED highlights, supplementals, and changes. Rate Setting Units website. Here's a link to our website. We have manuals and forms, correspondence, certified tuition rates, and online data. You can register for access to CEDFIN, the State Education Department Finance Information System, here via the link. Late submission penalty. For SED provider, the interest expense on working capital loans for late filers of required financial information will be reimbursed on a prorated basis if submitted within 90 days of January 1st for July to June filers, or within 90 days of July 1st for January to December filers. No interest expense will be reimbursed for entities that file cost reports more than 90 days after January 1st for July to June filers, or July 1st for January to December filers. Non-reimbursable interest expense will affect the tuition rates for the tuition rate year 2 years after the report year associated with the required financial information and will apply to all tuition rates for that year. Prospective appeal, reconciliation adjustments, rates, and financial audit. SED supplemental schedules. There are 2 supplemental schedules that are specific to SED. There's the SED-1, program and enrollment data, and the SED-4, related services. SED-1 program and enrollment data. This schedule is to be completed by all service providers requiring tuition rates from the New York State Education Department for school age and preschool programs. This schedule should also be completed by service providers operating infant programs. The top half of the SED-1 collects student enrollment by program by full-time equivalent or FTE, report total FTEs by funding source on SED-1 lines 100 to 107. Report the total days the program operated on SED-1 line 109, number of days in session. These enrollment figures should correspond to the tuition revenues reported on line 69 and or 88 to 92 and or line 94 of Schedule CFR1. Enter the number of days in the full-time program during the September to June school year and the number of days in the full-time program during the preceding July and August if the program was approved to operate during that period. The September through June school year must be at least 180 days. The July through August summer program must report a minimum of 30 days. For Special Education Itinerant Services, also known as SEIT, on SED-1, line 111, mandated CS or SEIT units provided, report billable units, half-hour units, on the basis of enrollment as mandated by students' IEPs. Comparing this number to the billable SEIT units as reported on CFR1, line 13, as a measure of efficiency. Report the actual IEP mandated half-hour units of service provided for all special education itinerant services, or SEIT, on SED-1, line 115, actual CS or SEIT units provided. Calculate care days by multiplying total FTEs by session days. Mandated SEIT units of service should be reported by county in the appropriate program to the student's IEP, individual 9135 to 9319 or group 9140 to 9149. Additionally, the mandated unit of service should coincide with the actual provided unit of service. So for example, if a student's IEP indicates they are mandated for a group session, their unit of service should be reported in 9140 to 9144. If they received services in a group of 2 or in 9145 to 9149, they are related services, or they receive services in a group of 3. Actual provided CIT units of service should be reported on a per session basis, non-prorated. For example, a half-hour group CIT session with 3 students should be reported as 1 unit of service. Enrollment is reported as a full-time equivalent FTE. A student is counted as full-time, 1 FTE, unless admitted after the start of the school year, or discharged before the end of the school year, or determined to be illegally absent. FTE is calculated based upon weeks enrolled divided by the number of weeks the program is in session. And you can refer to section 32 of the CFR manual, page 32A.2. Student FTE is also prorated when a child is in a program for less than 5 hours. FTE is calculated by the number of hours in the program divided by 5 hours. Full-day programs are 5 hours of instruction. Care days are used to calculate a per-day tuition rate, which is used in the rate-setting methodology. Care days are established by multiplying the student FTE times the session days in the school year. So for example, 25 students times 180 days and 30 days equals 4,500 plus 750, which equals 5,250 care days. Refer to the CFR manual for examples of student enrollment FTE calculations. When reporting student enrollment FTEs for students with one-to-one aids, include the student FTE in both the 9230 program and the program the student is enrolled in. SED1, lines 201 to 903, details the total number of classrooms operated and student FTEs enrolled by program for each SED approved classroom ratio, which should agree to program approval letter in effect for the CFR year, so students to teachers to aides. And for special class in an integrated setting programs, do not include non-disabled students in your ratio. So for example, for a program approved as a 15:1:2 with 1 special education teacher and 1 paraprofessional for 7 disabled students and 1 paraprofessional for 8 non-disabled students, you'd report the ratio as 7:1:1, not 15:1:2. So this is a sample of an SED1 for calendar year filers. Now I will discuss the SED4 related services. So the SED4 is broken down into 3 sections: capacity, need, and productivity. The SED4 is required for all rate-based programs except for CIT programs. Program codes 9135 to 9149. SED4 not required if the only special education program a service provider operates is a CIT program. Programs 9135 to 9149. Schedule RS2 does not need to be sent to SED. However, please retain a copy of this schedule for your files. An Excel version of the RS2 schedule is available at the link provided on the Rate Setting Unit's website under Manuals and Forms. SED providers should use the data compiled on Schedule SED4 to report the CFR information for direct care related service staff. Here's a sample of a completed SED4. RS2 information. Data from the RS2 feeds into the SED4. These forms are used to determine the capacity, need, and productivity of related services for school-age and preschool special education programs. Instructions to RS2 may be found on RSU's website at the link provided. Complete a separate RS2 for each related service type. Schedule RS2, column 6A, total by therapy type. Report sessions in half-hour blocks of time. Prorate as needed. For example, 45 minutes would equal 1.5 sessions. Schedule RS2 has a new column, column number 13. Annual IEP mandated related service sessions not provided due to telepractice accessibility issues. Report sessions not provided due to accessibility issues related to delivering services via telepractice. And I'm now handing the presentation off to the next presenter.
Good morning. My name is Sean Griffin, representing the Office of Mental Health, and I will be discussing the COVID-19 schedule. The COVID-19 schedule is a supplemental schedule developed to help understand the economic impact of the pandemic on each provider. This independent schedule is required for all CFR submission types and agencies except for SED. SED providers are required to complete the COVID-19 schedule, which will be discussed later. Lastly, information reported on this schedule does not transfer to any other CFR schedule. The instructions for the COVID-19 schedule can be found in Section 33B of the CFR manual. As a reminder, the schedule must be completed using the accrual basis of accounting. In addition, while the schedule is not subject to certification, it should be reviewed for reasonableness. The purpose of this schedule is to report increases in program administration and program site expenses and revenues during the reporting period that are a result of COVID-19. Please report expenses incurred and revenues earned for the reporting period on the appropriately defined lines. If there is no applicable line, report the expenses or revenue on the other line. This schedule encompasses 3 sections: general information, program site data, and personal services. The 3 sections can be seen on the provided image. Each section has its own tab and data requirements detailed in the CFR manual. Pictured here is the general information tab, which shows the related questions. The next few slides will detail the questions asked in the General Information tab. The first question asks if your agency has received first and second drawers for the Paycheck Protection Program. The answer to this question will prompt the next set of questions. If yes, you will be directed to complete additional follow-up questions. If no, CFRS Web will advance you to question number 3. As mentioned, if your answer to 1A is yes, you will be prompted to answer additional questions regarding the PPP loan. Some examples include the total amount received, the date received, and if the loan has been forgiven in the current reporting period. If the loan has been forgiven, we request that you provide the amount forgiven in question 2C. Question 3 reports on the total amount of revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debt recorded during the reporting period that was attributable to COVID-19 funding, grants, loan forgiveness, contributions, awards, and tax credits. Some items included in total revenue and gains include COVID-19 grants from federal and/or state agencies, counties, and private foundations. In addition, the amount of PPP loan that was forgiven and recorded as revenue or as a gain on the extinguishment of debt, federal tax credits, and donations resulting from the pandemic should also be reported. After completion of the General Information tab, please complete the Program Site Data tab, which requires specific program site data. Before entering the program data, the user must select the state agency, the program, and the site from the drop-down options. Expenses reported within this section must be related to the pandemic. These expenses are over and above normal agency expenses. Expenses include, but are not limited to, personal protective equipment, personal services, temporary housing for COVID-positive residents or exposed staff, cleaning services and machines, telecommunication, storage facilities, interest on debt, and FEMA. FEMA costs for emergency medical services include emergency medical care for COVID-19 patients, emergency operation centers, facilities, meals and supplies for emergency workers, medical supplies, and training. For further information, please review the program and policy guide provided in the link. Next, we move on to the program site specific revenue. The revenue section should only report COVID-19 funding that was recorded as revenue during the reporting period. There are many sources of revenue, such as CARES Act loans, program rate changes, COVID-19 grants awarded by federal, state, or other governmental agencies, donations, and COVID-19 federal tax credits. Please be aware that federal grants will be reported on line 64 using the predefined entries. Some examples include U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, PPP, Economic Injury Disaster Loan Emergency Advance, FEMA, and the Federal Communications Commission. The last tab of the schedule is used to report personal services. Similarly to the Program Site tab, the user must select the agency, program, and site from the drop-down arrows before entering data. Required data includes position, standard work week, hours paid, and amount paid. Personal services should only be reported if they were incurred responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. The personal services reported will be entered in the same manner as the program site-specific section of the CF4 schedule. All total personal services expenses entered will transfer to line 1 of the program site data section of the second tab. For additional information, refer to the instructions of the Schedule CFR4 located in Section 16.0 of the CFR Manual. And now I'm going to pass off the microphone to the next presenter.
Thank you. This is Mackenzie Beisler with SED again. I'm going to go over the COVID-19S informational schedule. So the COVID-19S is required for all CFR submissions from SED providers and is completed independent from the other CFR schedules and the COVID-19 schedule. The COVID-19S schedule is used to report the net changes in program administration and program site expenses and revenues in the reporting period. On a program site specific basis that are specifically related to COVID-19. The information reported on this schedule should be the net changes in expenses and revenues determined by the provider to be related to COVID-19. For additional information on how to complete the COVID-19 schedule, please refer to the instructions in Section 33C of the CFR Manual. The COVID-19 schedule will not be subjected to certification, but should be reviewed for reasonableness. This is a sample of what the 19S questions will look like. The questions deal with the Payroll Protection Program loans and if those loans are forgiven. Complete the questions in the General Information section of the COVID-19S schedule. For question 1A, select yes or no. If yes, proceed to question 1B. If no, proceed to question 3. For question 2A, select yes or no. If yes, proceed to question 2B. If no, proceed to question 3. If you select yes to question 4, please make sure that you are reporting the appropriate expenses and revenues on the COVID-19S schedule. If you are a multi-funded agency, you will need to report the SED data separate from the other agencies you are reporting to. COVID-19S expenses. Personal services, program and site and program administration. The personal services section of the COVID-19S schedule is completed in the same manner as the program site specific section of Schedule CFR4. For each position, title code that is added to a program site, the standard work week is selected, and the hours paid and amount paid are entered. The total personal service expenses for each program site transfers to line 1 of the program site data section of the COVID-19S schedule. For additional information on how to complete the personal services section of the COVID-19S schedule, please refer to the instructions for Schedule CFR4, located in Section 16 of the CFR manual. This is a screenshot of the COVID-19S from CFR Web. Contracted direct care and clinical personal services. The Contracted Direct Care and Clinical Personal Services section of the COVID-19S schedule is completed in the same manner as the program site specific section of Schedule CFR 4A. The data for each program site transfers to line 20 of the program site data section of the COVID-19S schedule. For additional information on how to complete the Contracted Direct Care and Clinical Personal Services section of the COVID-19S schedule, please refer to the instructions for Schedule CFR 4A, located in Section 17 of the CFR manual. And here is another screenshot of the COVID-19S from CFR Web. Other than personal services, OTPS expenses reported on this schedule should be the net change in expenses determined by the provider to be related to COVID-19. Some examples: if food costs were down because children were remote learning, line 6 of net change in costs incurred by the program site providing meals and/or snacks to the program site participants would reflect a negative amount. If supplies and materials, non-household, increase because a provider brought additional PPE or personal protective equipment, line 21 on COVID-19S would reflect the amount of the PPE costs only. If any of the program site specific or program administration non-allowable costs have been included on Schedules CFR1 through CFR5, they should also be included on the line 51 adjustments non-allowable costs on COVID-19S schedule. Report the detail of adjustments to reported costs by program site, along with the corresponding amounts and line number where the cost is reported on Schedule CFR1. Refer to Appendix X for more information regarding non-allowable expenses. And please note that negative entries are not allowed on line 51. Here is a screenshot of the COVID-19S on the CFR Web. COVID-19S revenues. Report in the revenue section of the COVID-19S schedule only the net change in revenue and gains on the extinguishment of debt recorded in the period that were related to COVID-19. For the following line items of revenue, only report the revenues received after netting out any negotiated contractual adjustments. Line 53, participant fees, line 59, other third parties. So for example, Agency XYZ Inc. has a published fee of $105, a visit for the provision of medically supervised outpatient chemical dependent services. XYZ Inc. has contractually agreed to $75 per visit for patients covered by the Healthy Life Inc. health insurance company. For every billable visit by a person covered by Healthy Life Inc., XYZ Inc. will report $75 in revenue, not $105, with a $30 adjustment to revenue. And here is a screenshot of the COVID-19S on the CFR web. And lines 55, 56, 57, 58, 60, 61, and 62 are not applicable to SED. And with that, I am now going to hand this over to the next presenter.
Hi, this is Paul Green from OASAS. The SUPP-1 is the upper payment limit schedule. SUPP-1 is schedule collects data for use in the upper payment limit calculation. The UPL is a federal limit placed on fee-for-service reimbursements of Medicaid providers. Hospitals and federally qualified health centers are exempt from completing the SUPP-1. All other OMH, OASAS, and OPWDD providers who complete a full CFR and operate any of the following program types must complete the SUPP-1. UPL data scheduled by program and site code. So there's a listing of the OASAS programs, the OMH and OPWDD programs. If you operate those programs, you must complete the SUPP-1. Providers who fail to submit CFRs or submit inaccurate or incomplete information may lose any supplemental UPL payments they would otherwise be entitled to. Here's a screenshot of the SUPP-1. You'll see at the top left, it's a state agency, the program, and the site. And then the white sections are the sections that you're completing. The gray sections are calculations or mainly calculations. So total visits, 420, 300, add up to 720, plus the 500, add up to 1220. Gross revenues, so is what you complete there. And then net revenue is what you receive, and then the adjustment is automatically calculated. Report the number of total threshold visits by the payer. For purpose of this schedule, a visit is defined as including all service provided to a patient on the same day. So I'm not going to go into the full description here, but the big thing to take away from this is a threshold visit. If the person comes in the morning for a session and then comes back in the afternoon for maybe a different session, a group session, it's still only one visit. So it's not by the number of procedures, it's by the number of threshold visits, and they can only get one threshold visit per day, okay? For OASAS opioid treatment programs billed under APGs, such as rate code 1564 and 67, while often claimed weekly, they receive a Medicaid payment for each day during the week on which a payment interaction occurs. Therefore, each date of service on the weekly claim would be counted as a Medicaid visit, and the facilities billed Medicaid under APG should report the number of daily visits in the total visits column. So even though they're billing once for a week, it doesn't go by billing, it goes by visits, okay? And then down at the bottom, the OASAS OTP Medicaid weekly bundle rates, that's a little bit different. That's kind of the opposite. The bundles, which are these specific codes, they're bundled together and they're billed weekly. And in that case, you're going to take the one weekly visit, not the multiple daily visits. Okay, that's the only exception. So we're coming to the end of the core reporting and the supplementals, and we're going to go on in a second. But before I do that, I just want to point out a couple quick things. One, hopefully this presentation is helpful to you. If it is or if it isn't, when you do exit, there is a survey that can be filled out that could give us some constructive criticism. So we'd appreciate that. About a month or two from now, you're going to start working on your CFRs, and maybe some of this will stick in your mind. Maybe some of this will be forgotten. Well, you do understand that we are recording it, and it will be posted on the YouTube on a date to be announced. Also, the questions that are being asked, they're not going to be answered real quickly. They won't be done for at least a month or two. But prior questions for prior periods are listed on the OMH site, and they're almost the same questions. So if you're looking for an answer to a question, feel free to look at that OMH site under FAQs of previously asked questions, which would maybe help you. Also, we sent out a handout, which is basically the presentation, including speaker notes, and we sent out a sample. If you didn't get it for some reason, feel free to let us know, and I'll make sure you get it. But that should hopefully help you too. And finally, when you sit down to do the CFR, if you run into an issue, I think your first line of defense would be the state agencies' CFR review units. The information was given back, the contact list was given back previously. I would contact us first before you contact the IT department. There's a lot of things that we can help you with prior to getting IT involved. So, and if we can't help you, then we will direct you to contact IT. But hopefully we can help you. And with that, I'm going to go on to the remainder of this presentation is directed towards agencies that submit a claiming document, DMH2 and DMH3. If your agency does not, then you may leave at this time, okay? Agencies that file a claiming document include those receiving state aid or local aid in the form of net deficit funding. Agencies that do not file a claiming document include OASAS, OMH, OPWDD providers that do not receive any state aid for any programs. Also, SED, DOH, and OCFS providers do not file a claiming document, okay? So if you receive state aid, stay on the line. And if you do not receive state aid, or if you're an SED, DOH, or OCFS provider only, then you can leave at this time. If you don't know whether you receive state aid or not, that's fine. Just bear with us. It's only another 20 minutes or so, okay? So moving on to the DMH2, DMH3. So we've completed the core reports. The core reports are everything from the CFR1 to the DMH1, and then you have the supplementals, and now we have the claim, okay? The core, well, let's talk about budget modifications. You create a budget prior to the year happening, and then you create a claim after the year happened, okay? If you haven't done so already, compare your projected expenses, the budget and revenues, to your approved budget now. If it appears a modification to the approved budget is required, consult the funding New York State agency for guidance. All right, so if you have changes to your budget, consult your agency to see if changes are necessary. So claiming is what has actually happened, and it's used to settle up with the money that may have been paid to you already in advance payments. You can start by going right to the DMH2 and inputting information as you choose, or you can start at the bottom of the DMH1 program and summary schedule and click on the DMH1 to DMH2 transfer. this is recommended because now it's going to transfer all the information from the DMH1 to the DMH2, and then if you want to, you can go in and adjust it later, but at least you won't miss anything. Okay. So when you click on the DMH1 to 2 transfer, it comes up with this screen, and it says, here's a list of all the programs, and there's several programs. Now you decide which ones you want to transfer. If you want to transfer all of them, you can select all of them, or you can select a few of them. You go by percentage or units of service, and then you pick the county you want to transfer to. And in this case, you're transferring 100% of these 3 programs to this county. Okay. So if you were Warren and Washington, you had programs in 2 different counties, you could select the Warren counties, the 3 Warren counties, put in Warren County, transfer that, and then come back and select the other 2 programs and transfer them to Washington County, 100%. Then you're done. You're going to click on the transfer button. If I used to do a review for a provider who had a program that was split evenly between Warren and Washington County. So in that case, you could pick a program, you could come to here, and you could select 2 different counties. You could, in this case, I did Bronx and New York, but you could do Warren for 50% of the program and Washington for 50% of the program. Okay, and you would do that by clicking on Add a County. If you don't want it anymore, you could click on Delete. So delete New York and then add Warren and such. So it gives you that flexibility. The existing data in DMH2 will be replaced by the selected programs. Do you want to continue? So it's saying that there's already data there, and the answer is yes, you want to continue. All right, now it's saying that the data has been transferred successfully. However, some of the detailed lines require input, okay? So by that it means on line 17A, Medicaid fee-for-service, the total, $449, transferred over, okay? But the drop-down box did not. So you have to click on the drop-down box, and you have to go in and you type in for base Medicaid 449,918 so that the drop-down box equals the total. So that is something that you have to do for any program that has a drop-down box. If you forget to do it, when you hit validations, it will remind you then. Okay. So now you're at the DMH2. You've got several tabs here: expenses, revenues, adjustments, deficit, and expense variance. You're going to start with an OASAS program, and you're going to pick the county. The county, when you click on this drop-down, it's going to list all the counties available. If you click on the asterisk, it'll move the counties that you've been using previously to the top of the list. So click on the asterisk. That brings you to Broome County. You select the program, and then you continue down here, and you go to contract type, direct or local. So what's a contract direct? Direct contracts generally start with a C00, okay? Local contracts can be anything. It can be New York, it can be Niagara, first 7 letters in a word of the county. It can be a number, but again, direct contracts are generally C0. You also have to select the accounting method from the drop-down. Again, the core reports were accrual. Everything was accrual on the core reports, but now you're at the claim, and generally they're accrual, but sometimes they're modified accrual or cash basis. Once you've completed this information, you go to the rest of the expenses: personal services, vacation leave accruals, fringe benefits, and such. Okay. This has all been transferred over from the DMH1. If for some reason you don't like it, if the fringe benefits you feel should be different, this is a white line. So you can go in there and you can delete that number and type in the number that you you would like it to be. However, we would not expect differences in certain lines. We would not expect differences in personal services, fringe benefits, OTPS. OASAS does not allow vacation leave accruals, so we would expect a difference there if it went from a number to a 0. Okay, but again, personal services from the core to the claim should not change. Fringe benefits should not change. OTPS should not change. Now, equipment and property, that should change. And the reason is you depreciated that expensive piece of equipment that you bought. Rightfully so. On the core reports, you depreciate it because we're using that for fiscal analysis, and we want to compare from year to year. And if you have an expensive piece of machinery in this year and nothing in the next year, well, then it's going to be it's not going to be very good for comparison purposes. There's not going to be a baseline to follow. So we want you to depreciate it there, spread that expense out over multiple years. But on the claim, we reimbursed you for that full amount of equipment. Therefore, you have to expense the full amount of the equipment. Okay. We gave you a drop-down box here. The drop-down box allows you to make additions or subtractions to the number that transferred over from the DMH-1. Okay. You can add the expense of the equipment. So now you'll be reimbursed for that full piece of equipment. But you'll also subtract the depreciation because that was part of the number that transferred over. Okay? So if you don't have a drop-down box here, that's okay because some agencies don't provide for that information. OASAS provides a drop-down box and allows that. Some agencies, it would just be a white line and you would type that in. If you have any questions with this, this is the type of thing that you would direct to that specific agency. Okay? So equipment and property handled about the same way. Agency administration, again, we would not expect, OASAS would not expect that number to change. And adjustments for non-allowable costs, again, that amount would transfer over and it could adjust because non-allowable is for core reporting, non-reimbursable is for claim reporting. So you could actually have an additional non-reimbursable expense. We won't get too far into that right now. We'll go on to the next, which is the revenue. Revenue, here's lines 14 through 22. And again, you could, any revenue that was transferred over, you could change it. In this particular case, this is a drop-down box, so you got to remember to go in and make sure that the line details match the total. Okay. And then we go from 23 to 30, including line 28, which is the net deficit funding. Okay. Net deficit funding is monies received directly from New York State through a direct contract with the state, or monies received from the LGU, county and state funds, through a contract between the LGU and the service provider. Do not include the provider share voluntary contributions in this amount. Okay. So gross revenue here is $150,000. Then it goes to the next tab, which is adjustments, and you'll see net gap adjustments is $150,000, which brings you down to line 43, net operating cost. Okay. Net operating cost is your total expenses less all your other revenues, Medicaid revenue, coin-operated machine revenue, contributions, everything besides state aid, okay? So going back, we had $154,000 of expenses, and then we subtract all the revenue except for state aid. Well, there was no other revenue. Therefore, my net operating cost is $154,000. Okay. So now I have my net operating cost. So then I go to the next tab, which is deficit funding. Deficit funding is how much money was received from the state in the state contract or the local contract. In this case, $150,000. However, line 49 must equal line 43, so it must equal the $154,000. So in that case, $4,084 was non-funded. All right. If this is your first time, I know it's a little bit confusing, but you'll see it as you get to do it, and it works out pretty easily, and the software does help you. So in this particular case, line 49 must equal line 43, which is the end of the adjustments to revenue. If you try to save it, if you try to validate, it'll tell you line 49 does not equal 43. Go back and correct it. Couple things to think about here is line 44 is equal to the state aid. For OASAS, report the lower of the contract amount or net operating costs reported on line 43. Line 45 is for county tax dollars. Line 46, provider voluntary contribution. OASAS programs line is not enterable. Line 47 is a subtotal. Line 48 is non-funded amount. So this is the amount that your agency basically is eating. For OMH, this is the surplus or deficit of funding over expenses. DMH2, line 43, less line 47. For OPWDD, indicate the amount of all other funding used to support the net operating costs, which does not fall into lines 44 through 47 above. Okay. And then line 49, total net deficit must match line 43. So each of the agencies have a little bit of different way of handling this. It is all in section 22 of the CFR manual, and the software does help you. It makes it a lot easier than it sounds right now. All right, so the last tab is expense variance. Here's your DMH1 numbers. Here's your DMH2 numbers. If there's a variance, we want an explanation as to why. So I said that vacation leave accruals for OASAS will not transfer over. So that's why it's 0 here. All right, you only have this amount of space to write your description, so it does not have to be long-winded. It should be something like vacation leave accruals are not allowed. Boom. Here we go, non-reimbursable depreciation expense. So you adjusted out $10,000 of depreciation expense. And here's an example of where you did not write something in, and this is the error code that you're going to get, and you will not be able to pass validations until you correct that, okay? So it's an explanation of the difference between the DMH1 and the 2, which is the core reports and the claim. I haven't seen it in a while, but there was a time when we were giving agencies $50,000 towards furniture, and when it came down to it, we wanted it reported separately on the DMH2, okay? So instead of reporting it all in one column, we split it out into 2 columns. All right. So if anybody ever asks you to split something out into 2 columns, then you would say, well, how am I going to do that? You're going to click on the define a DMH only program. Okay, so it's basically adding a column to your claim. Okay, and when you click on that, it'll come down here and it'll say define what's a selected program, and you'll click the program. And then it'll say enter the index code. You'll enter the index code. And then it'll say save. And all of a sudden you'll have an extra column on your claim for this program with that index code. And now you can report the $50,000 of furniture under the other than personal services column. All right. This won't happen often, but if it does, now you know how to do it. The only thing you should remember is you have two columns now. You should probably go back and take that $50,000 out of the first column. So go back and reduce the amount that was reported on the first column by $50,000 because the two columns together should equal the total. All right. If you have any issues with a DMH-only site, you created it from the DMH2, but if you want to adjust it, edit it, or delete it, you go to the program site definition screen, okay? DMH-only programs, maybe this carried over from last year, and last year you were asked to do that, but this year you're not, so you can just click on delete to delete it, or you can click on edit to edit if you want. Okay. So summary, DMH2 is completed on a New York State agency and county-specific basis. The method of accounting must be indicated over each column, and it should be either accrual, modified accrual, or cash basis. Direct or local contracts must be selected, and generally a direct contract starts with a C0, and a local contract may be the first 7 letters of the county name. It could be anything else, to be honest with you. Agency administration is distributed between the New York State agencies using a ratio value. And within OASAS and OPWDD, the software calculated ratio value must be used. So again, for OASAS and OPWDD, we're expecting the same agency admin on the DMH2 that was on the DMH1. But on the DMH2, equipment may be expensed rather than depreciated. Equipment costing $5,000 or more per unit and having a useful life for 2 must be reported on line 9. And additional details in the reporting of revenue on the other lines, the CFRS web provides line detail boxes to enter this data. Line detail boxes are for these things also, Medicaid, federal grants, state grants, and other. And when transferring data from the DMH1 to the 2, the CFR web only transfers line detail box. The detail information must be re-entered in the drop-down box. Okay, so then you submit the CFR, you're feeling pretty good, and you get a review email or letter a couple weeks later, and they say, we want you to make some changes. And you agree, okay, that's fine, I'll make the change. I make the change to the CFR1, I make the change to the CFR4, and I feel like I'm pretty good to go, and I'm ready to resubmit it. Well, you gotta remember, the changes that you made on the core reports do not automatically transfer to the claim. So if you change the numbers on the personal services on the core, the number on the claim is still the old number. So you have to remember to retransfer the data from the DMH1 to the DMH2 every time you make any changes to the core reports. Okay. DMH3, aid to localities. DMH3 is all about the funding source. So we gave you some money, and we want to track where that money came from. Which funding source did it come from? OASAS only has 5 funding sources, so life is good for us. We have 013S, we have 013F, and such. OMH and OPWDD have many funding source codes, so you can refer back to the CFR manual if you have any questions on it. However, this funding source code should be on the contract that was given to you. So that's where you're going to start. So in this particular case, completing a DMH3, and you can't pass validations unless you complete the DMH3, you're going to start by picking the state agency, the county, and the program. Okay? Then you're going to come down and you're going to pick the funding source code. Again, if you click the asterisk, the most commonly used and previously used funding source codes will move to the top of the list. So that's what we recommend you do. Okay. Contract type and local contract. So the DMH3 is compared directly back to the DMH2 that you just completed. So if you picked local contract on the DMH2, then you should be picking local contract here. And the contract number should be the same and the numbers should be the same. So the information needs to be the same, and if it doesn't, you'll get failures on the validation process. Okay. You may have to fill in this number of persons served and number of units of service. Okay, if you pick the wrong county, in this case, I picked the wrong county. I picked New York. It was supposed to be Niagara. One's 31 to 132. You can go up here and you could change it here. And if you do that, then you're going to have two counties. Okay? You're going to have both New York and Niagara. It's just New York's not going to have any information in it. And then when you go to validate, it's going to fail because you have a county without any information. All right. So the way to do it is to, instead of changing it there, click on the Change County button. And it'll say the current one is 1, and what do you want to make the new one? And you click on that, and you click Update, and you're closed, and you're done. All right. So changing the county button is the best way to do it. You can also change the funding source. If last year it was 013S, and this year it's 013F or something else, you can click on Change Funding Source, and it will change it and update it, and you're done. All right. If you accidentally create a new one, there is a way to delete it, so you can delete it. You can click on the Delete Funding Source. Are you sure you want to delete it? Yes, and so. Now, you can also get to that from the Utilities menu, Delete Funding Source Code that was mentioned earlier. Again, this would all be mentioned, this would all come through when you go to validate. When you validate, it'll say DMH3 funding source code, this has no input. And you'll say, oh, well, that's not supposed to be there. And you'll go to the utilities and you'll delete it. All right, and another scenario. This is one of two funding source codes. So this program receives money from two different funding source codes. For the first one, they have total expenses of $904,000. But if you look over to the right, this is a running total for this program, and the total is $955. Therefore, there's $51,000 of expenses that are not reported here. So we go to the next slide, and there it is, $51,000, and that's under a different funding source code, okay? So, again, that's what this column over to the right is. It's grayed out, which means you can't input it. It's all just calculated automatically, and it is basically a total of all the of all the data input for all the different funding source codes for this program, all right? Now, if your total expenses is not accurate, you'll get this error code. And it's pretty easy. It says the total expenses for line 12, 912, must equal DMH2, line 13, 913, 941. So all I would do there, again, because the DMH3 is compared to the DMH2, all I would do is change this from 912 to 913, 941. I'd do the same for this. And then once I do those two, this one will probably automatically correct itself. So the error codes, read them. They're not there to hurt you. They're there to help you. And hopefully, if you read them, it'll explain what the problem is. So in summary, OASAS and OMH, the contract number and type indicated for each program will be transferred to the DMH3. For OPWDD, at least one contract number and type, state or local combination, indicated for each program on DMH3 must match the information indicated for that program on DMH2. DMH3 is completed on a New York State agency and county-specific basis. Funding source codes are found in Appendix N of the CFR manual. Contract numbers must be entered. Contract type must be designated, be it state or local. For each funding source, enter person served per year, units of service, total adjusted expenses, applied net revenue, net operating cost per funding source is calculated, and refer to budget for funding source codes and amounts. And the figure is the sum of the amount reported on all funding source codes. So the total adjusted expenses for all funding source must equal DMH line 2. So that's what's going to appear in red, and it's going to say, if you have an error, change this number to this number. Okay. And then finally, this is a comparison of DMH3 lines to DMH2. And on that, I am done with the claiming. If you have any issues, questions, or concerns, feel free to reach out to your individual agencies. And on that note, I am going to hand the microphone back off to the host. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. This is Alpamin again. When in doubt, use the help function. When in the doubt, use the help function. We believe this will be a useful tool, especially because CFR Web is new to everyone. Within the menu function at the bottom, you can find the help icon. A PDF file with the help contents will open a separate browser tab. Alternatively, click on the help icon next to the schedule name, and a PDF file specific to the schedule will open in a separate browser tab. Thank you once again for participating in the CFR training webinar for the calendar 2022 Consolidated Fiscal Report. In case you missed the beginning of the webinar, please take the time to fill out the post survey after you leave the event. It will help us make this training better. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted online shortly. An email will be sent out notifying you of the location. The Q&As will be carefully reviewed and answer will be posted online as soon as possible. This concludes the CFR presentation for session 2.